All right, a practical quantum computer is coming, but when? It's a news video. 18 minutes, I guess, so let's see.
Tool. This is the biggest molecular beam epitaxy tool in the world, as far as we know. And this tool is making a very special material that we need to realize any kind of useful quantum computer.
California-based startup PsiQuantum is one of the many companies working to make large-scale quantum computing a reality.
We are inside the Stanford Linear Accelerator cryo plant that makes
Slack.
liquid helium, and PsiQuantum is using a little bit of that helium, and what we do is we load chips into this cabinet to cool those chips to very low temperature. So this is minus 270 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, it's a fun fact of how like things in the US are they've been messed up for a while. There's this delusion of it's a random story, like this delusion with how things used to work and how they should keep working, but the system has changed. So when I first came to Stanford for my first postdoc, I was put up at the guest house at Slack for maybe a couple of weeks, and I had that time essentially getting paid like 40-50K to find a place to live. Like, so Stanford didn't even provide researchers with housing. So if you're a grad student, you got grad student housing, but if you're a postdoctoral researcher, they didn't provide you, and I think they still don't provide you with any housing. So you got to go out and find all of these like makeshift rental places. And it was very stressful, it was very painful. And again, it's, postdocs are typically, usually 2 years up to 4 years or more. And so overall, it was just this really almost borderline abusive system in which you're doing research. This is the backbone of your economy, is doing the freaking research, and yet you're treating like absolute garbage. So you're paid almost nothing, and they don't even subsidize you with easy housing, so it's just affordable, stress-free. And yeah, it was a very stressful experience. So to be honest, that's there were all these little things that added up that made it very difficult for me to transition away from academia. And then also in the US, there's this weird psychology that in industry, because there's so many hangups and insecurities that if your PhD doesn't count, they don't want to count it as work experience. So they count it as like an extended undergraduate, which is ridiculous. So again, this little story, this little snippet is another reason why it's very easy for the Chinese to just pull ahead in their research, because the US essentially treats researchers like crap. But anyway.
Celsius, it's about 2.3 Kelvin base temperature, which is the same temperature as deep space.
Right.
Quantum computers promise to solve problems that are impossible for traditional computers, with the potential to transform entire sectors, including material science, pharmaceutical research, and financial services. Investors have also been bullish about the technology's future, with some quantum computing,
Rigetti, D-Wave, IonQ. D-Wave has been around the longest. They did quantum annealing, which essentially was not a universal quantum computer, but a system that was specifically designed for a subset of quantum calculations. It was a smart way to go about it. And to be honest, I'm really impressed that D-Wave is still around. It's a very impressive achievement that they've done.
computing stocks rallying over 1,000% in 2024.
If investors are looking for the next big jackpot, it sounds like they're really focusing attention on quantum computing stocks.
Excitement around quantum computing reached a fever pitch after Google announced its Willow quantum chip at the end of last year.
By our best estimates, a calculation that takes Willow under 5.
Right, again, their calculations are, I just dig deep into what the calculation is about, and I'm going to try to do another video where I dig deep into that. What was the calculation? Is it worthwhile? But again, like a couple of weeks ago, the Chinese did the same thing.
5 minutes
They reproduced the Willow result, no problem.
would take the fastest supercomputer 10 to the 25 years, or a timescale way longer than the age of the universe.
Since then, a slew of other announcements from other tech giants have sustained that hype around and investment in the technology.
Microsoft announcing what it calls a quantum computer breakthrough with its new Majorana 1 chip.
Yeah, again, the Majorana chip. They didn't make the chip. It's very slim on details.
Amazon jumping into.
There's a lot of hype, and it's based mostly around. Like, to be honest, I'm just being perfectly honest here. It strikes me as panic-stricken regarding what the Chinese are doing. So it's not based that much on actual promising results, but I mean, they're all interesting results, and stepwise you're going to get there, but...
The quantum computing race with its first chip.
We're going to open a quantum research lab in Boston. It will likely be the most advanced accelerated computing hybrid quantum computing research lab in the world.
Intel and IBM are also working to develop quantum technology, as are governments and numerous startups. The United Nations has even proclaimed 2025 as the International Year of Quantum Science.
It's a new class.
I don't know. I mean, I'm a legacy quantum scientist. I mean, I was one of the first, few when it was just a baby field back in the early 2000s. I don't really have anyone banging down my door trying to get me back into the field, so I'm really skeptical about it. It's a lot of fluff, a lot of just, make it to the news cycle, get the hype up, a lot of pump and dump.
It's a computation that I think can dramatically change most aspects of industry, commerce, and science.
By some estimates, greater than 50 billion.
Again, potential for quantum is huge. I think I really am a believer in quantum computing. This is why I got into the field. I fell in love with qubits in my undergraduate during a quantum course. I left theoretical high energy physics and I went into quantum. I studied, entanglement fidelity way back with Sir Peter Knight and Vlatko Vedral at Imperial College. So I really think it's a cool system. I really felt like there was this really dry patch in which I had to leave because there was nothing happening, and a lot of very intelligent, successful researchers in my generation also left, and now there's money sort of flooding back in, but I'm not sure if it's actually being used for sensible research or if it's just a lot of marketing. And just today on CGTN, the Chinese news channel, they announced it was on Nature. I published in Nature on March 18th. China has created a quantum key distribution satellite connection between Beijing and South Africa, so it's the longest in the world. So they're really making all of these marks, and to my knowledge, I may have missed it, but we still don't even have a proof of principle demonstration of quantum key distribution between the US and any of our satellites, which is what I wanted to do at the end of my PhD.
$1 billion have been pledged to quantum technologies, of which quantum computing is one, by governments around the world.
Despite massive advancements in the field and
$55 billion in global investments. I mean, it just feels, it still feels like this is not quite, with billion in global investments, how much is Chinese just, take away maybe 5-10 billion or something. So again, it's just this real, I really can't help but just keep thinking that the US needs to drop like trillions of dollars in research funding across the board, and not just these desperate pump and dump like IPO, SPAC sort of stuff, but like get the research back into the labs, make it so that people are not so desperate that they've got to do these startups in order to keep going. Like make it so that it's an actual fun career where you don't have to worry about your finances. It's a viable option for living your life while you're doing this research, which it hasn't been for a while.
in recent years. Right now, these quantum computers are not able to solve the big real-world problems. It's still more theoretical.
They haven't been capable of solving any practical. I mean, this is a fluff piece. It's definitely a marketing piece.
CNBC visited one Silicon Valley startup to find out how close we are to having a useful quantum computer and spoke to
Not close, not in the US. I don't think so.
experts about the major challenges this tech still faces as engineers work to transition it from lab experimentation to commercial viability. The theory of quantum computing has been around since the 1980s, when physicists first suggested that quantum mechanics could be used for computation. By taking advantage of quantum physics,
namely Richard Feynman, he made a really strong push. I mean, Feynman was truly brilliant. I mean, he was brilliant, and he was one of those physicists that got me into physics, because his life spoke of an era in which physicists could actually enjoy their lives. And I thought my life would be more like, along the lines of, I'm not as brilliant as Feynman, but it felt like, you could do all of these things and play around. It doesn't feel that way anymore. It really doesn't. And even friends that I know across the board, even though it's in academia, everyone's really struggling. It's very hard.
computers are able to produce huge leaps in processing power and solve problems that conventional computers simply cannot manage.
There are two really important special quantum mechanical properties that give quantum computers an advantage on classical computers in solving certain types of problems.
Boston Consulting
Group,
BCG. I mean, why are you talking to BCG? It's very strange. Like CNBC, I get it. It's like this finance system. What does a management consulting company really know about innovation? So it's kind of absurd. It feels absurd. This video so far is a bit absurd.
Superposition. The second is entanglement.
Unlike classical computers, which store information in bits, with each bit representing either a 1 or a 0, quantum computers use quantum bits or qubits, which can exist in superposition of 1 and 0.
So entanglement and superposition are not two separate things. Entanglement is a complicated superposition.
Meaning they hold multiple possibilities simultaneously. Qubits can also be entangled, where the state of one instantaneously affects the other, no matter the distance. These properties enable quantum computers to solve certain types of problems exponentially faster than classical systems.
Unlike classical computers, quantum computers can directly simulate that behavior. And that allows us to design things instead of just discover things. All our drugs, we've gone into the Amazon, we've pulled bark off trees, we've seen how many mice die, and we've tried to make an oncology drug just by guessing and trying to optimize around stuff we discover. But being able to design materials directly, to be able to design chemistry, drugs, catalysts, requires a tool where we can simulate nature, and quantum computers are the first ones that can actually do that.
Quantum computers could also help with agriculture.
The way fertilizer is produced today comes at a really steep cost for companies. They're spending about $100 to $300 billion a year. And for the environment, 3 to 5% of the world's natural gas is
hopes and dreams. Hopes and dreams.
Annually used for fertilizer synthesis. Scientists today...
Actually, fertilizers is really cool. And one guy I respect a lot, I know with all of this billionaire hate, is Bill Gates. Loved his book on the environment. And I did not really, I didn't actually realize how much of a phenomenal innovation fertilizer was. But going through his book, it was really, really cool to learn about that. And also there was another book that spoke about essentially how the US in the sort of like 100, 150 years ago, about 100 years ago, went around trying to occupy these Pacific Islands for guano. Because there was this deep need for fertilizer, and once the fertilization process was discovered and how to do it in an industrial mechanism, so you didn't really need guano. not only could you support much larger populations, but kind of interestingly, it was more about the strategic history of the U.S. in how these islands were repurposed for military bases and for communications. So I just random thought, just
know how to use computers in order to find a much more energy efficient alternative. The problem is it would take even the fastest supercomputer 800,000 years to simulate all the maze-like molecular interactions of the key catalyst. With a quantum computer, it could be less than 24 hours.
But
it could be. I mean, I'm not sure what his background is. I'm not sure if he actually understands the system, or if he's been fed information, or if it's been distilled. But I guess this is what management consultants get paid for, is to make something complicated sound very simple, without potentially actually understanding the system itself and all the potential complications that are involved.
quantum computers will not replace conventional computers for everything. Some sectors could benefit more from the technology than others.
It won't replace AI. They are complementary technology.
Well, I mean, the way that a quantum computer works is it's a multi-shot system. So you either need to run the same simulation multiple times on the same quantum computer, or you need a few hundred quantum computers run simultaneously, and you populate an answer. Then when you get the answer, you simulate it. It's very easy to simulate that answer then on a classical computer to verify is it correct before you spit it out as the answer. So you still need classical computers, but I mean...
Technologies. Anything that is large data and small computation is not advantaged by a quantum machine. Optimization problems, physics problems, how we design fusion reactors, how we design superconductors, how we explore this incredible design space. Think of the most extraordinary applications.
Analysts estimate that the...
So, I mean, the general way of thinking about a quantum computer, where it's useful for is it can help you collapse a complicated problem into statistically giving you the possible answers. And so that's why it saves you a lot of time, is that you set up the wave function so that it's a problem, you do a measurement, it collapses into, it can only collapse theoretically into the possible answers, other than maybe some noise floor, depending on how you set up your simulation. And then statistically you get these peaks, and those peaks represent the answers. And then you take those peaks and feed them into your classical or your simulation in a classical computer and see, is it the answer? Or which of those answers is a valid answer, which is super quick to do.
4 industries likely to see the earliest economic impact from quantum computing are mobility, chemicals, financial services, and life sciences, which stand to gain up to $2 trillion in value by 2035.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but at the same time, there are all these predictions of, there's always predictions. It's like, yeah, clearly these are going to be benefiting from it, but whenever there is a paradigm shifting innovation, it always produces these benefits in industries you hadn't even thought about. In fact, it creates whole new industries.
Quantum says it's already working with a number of enterprise partners to experiment with potential use cases.
Mm-hmm. We're working with a bunch of different companies. So
Peter Shadbolt, Chief CSO and co-founder of PsiQuantum.
So Boehringer Ingelheim, for instance, a large European pharmaceutical company, Mercedes-Benz, Mitsubishi Chemical, and various other Fortune 500 companies as customers and partners. They're working with us.
So essentially, honestly, it's mostly just partners. So these companies are essentially given a first access deal where it's sort of we have the stuff. If by some miracle we get it working tomorrow, you get first access. And in exchange for that, we'll partner with you. Your partnership brand helps us raise funds. And also you give us access to some researchers whose job it is to try to figure out how could we potentially use our, garbage quantum computers right now, or I guess prototypes or production computers force, is there a killer app? Is there some utility even before we get a universal quantum computer going?
Today, with the hope that a quantum computer will allow them to design drugs, materials, fuels, catalysts, and really give them a new level of mastery over chemistry and physics that they hope will give them a profound competitive advantage in these areas.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why they're always nebulous is because there are very few concrete examples. And it's going to be hard to develop a concrete example until you
Ironically, the same
actually have a working quantum computer to play around with and poke around with. So it's kind of like saying, what would you be able, what game would you be able to make with a super sophisticated gaming engine? And you can sit and theorize, but it gets boring, right? It doesn't pay you to come up with that answer. But once you have that gaming engine there and then people start poking around and building games, then you start to see games pop up that you were kind of surprised by, like, oh, wow, I didn't know you could, it makes sense to do this. So it's the same thing. It's sort of like, the economy is kind of, the way this Japanese manager once explained it to me, and I really like it, is that the economy is essentially this elaborate game that we play in order to distribute food to everyone. And, it's when people forget that that's what the economy is, that's what the purpose of the economy is, that's when the society starts to fall apart.
Same quantum properties that make quantum computers really good at processing complex problems also make the technology extremely difficult to work with.
Unlike classical bits, which are physically stable and robust, qubits exist in highly delicate quantum states, and these states are easily perturbed by even the smallest interactions with the external environment, things like thermal noise, electromagnetic interference, vibrations, acoustic noise. The other challenge is that quantum superposition is ephemeral. So superposition allows qubits to represent multiple states at once, but maintaining this state requires precise isolation from the environment.
Think of coherence as a way of keeping a quantum system stable so that it can run calculations.
The whole difficulty of constructing a quantum computer is making something that, on the one hand, cannot interact with anything, right? On the other hand, you can control it. But controlling it means it's interacting with something, right? So it's like this very, very difficult engineering problem.
Yeah.
Quantum companies have been...
to be honest, that's what I loved about it. It was just this lovely puzzle to work with. And I honestly wish I could have worked with it longer. It was really fun to work with. So I'm really sad that when I graduated, the US didn't have these amazing grants out there that was just, easy to get into and just keep on mucking around and playing around with.
Experimenting with different quantum technologies, each with its own drawbacks and benefits.
There are superconducting qubits. There are neutral atom qubits, there are trapped ion qubits, and then there are other qubits which you see a little bit less industrially.
Google, IBM.
Yeah, so superconducting is Google, IBM, Amazon. I think they're trying to build one. I'm not sure they have one right now, but Rigetti, IQM, neutral atoms, trapped ion. So similar, mechanisms for neutral atom and for trapped ions, but the results is slightly different. Photonics, your Xanadu, PsiQuantum. Oh, PsiQuantum is photonics. Okay, so photonic, Xanadu, as the last time I checked, was doing linear optics quantum computing, and linear optics, on the one hand, has the most potential, on the other hand, has the most losses. So if there was a way to create a beam splitter, a lossless beam splitter, if there was a way to create a lossless beam splitter, then linear optics quantum computing would easily win. And then
IBM, Amazon, and Rigetti Computing are all betting on superconducting qubits, while Xanadu and PsiQuantum use photonic qubits.
Okay.
In February, Microsoft announced that it had created a quantum computing chip, Majorana 1, that uses a new type of qubit known as a topological qubit. The technology required the creation of a new state of matter that could make quantum computers more resilient to noise and shorten the technology's development timeline from decades to years.
Right.
The sensitivity of qubits to external environmental factors also makes quantum systems very prone to error. For many qubit technologies, managing this error has meant having to keep quantum chips at extremely low temperatures.
So Majorana is a really, like, all of them have compelling arguments for them, and it's hard to see what's going to actually win. But the compelling argument for Majorana and topological is that they're kind of creating, like, it's, the results are not as glamorous as their press release made it sound like, but the idea is still really cool, because essentially what you're creating is, it's kind of how nature gets around it with biological systems, it seems, is it creates a strong pattern, and it creates a strong pattern around your quantum system, and that either sustains your quantum system for long enough to perform whatever phenomenon that the biology wants to do, whether it's photosynthesis or, you know, in birds trying to view the magnetic field of the earth, and like other such examples. But from that point of view, it is kind of interesting. So I just, it's cool to just be in this field. I mean, it's a very cool field to be in.
The icon of quantum computing is the chandelier. That system is all about cooling these chips to very, very low temperatures.
Chandelier, yeah.
So they have to run deep space temperature, liquid helium temperature, very, very cold.
Mm-hmm.
Errors are also mitigated through the use of special algorithms that allow experts to correct errors faster than the machine can make them. This is something Google demonstrated with its Willow chip.
The Willow chip effectively operates below what's called the surface code threshold. Historically, when technology providers have added more qubits to the system, the overall system has a higher total error rate.
Yep.
What Google demonstrated is that with their error correcting code, adding more qubits to the system actually reduces the overall system error rate, and therefore there's a path to scaling with more and more qubits.
Peter Barrett, whose venture capital firm is a major investor in PsiQuantum, says that while Google and the other tech giants have made huge strides in quantum technology, he believes quantum computers based...
I mean, okay, to be fair to Google, it is a very good result. That was actually very well explained by the BCG chap. But, you know, it's a slight result at this point.
Based on photonic qubits, like the ones used by PsiQuantum, are more practical to scale.
Willow is the best quantum computer on the planet at the moment, but the machine PsiQuantum is making is 10.
I mean, Willow is the best quantum computer on the planet at the moment. I think it's so early in the race right now.
10,000 times the size of Willow. And the nice thing about photons is that they're much, much easier to keep isolated, and it's much easier to maintain the quantum state. And taking advantage of the fact that we have trillions of dollars invested in silicon photonics, in fiber optic cables, photons become a really strong candidate for building large machines, and their physics is well understood.
Part of that strategy, PsiQuantum is also moving away from the classic chandelier design of quantum computers in favor of a server rack design that you typically find in a data center.
Generally, the approach that we have here at PsiQuantum is that as much as possible, we want to build the quantum computer like a conventional computer, as opposed to a science experiment. And so we use regular semiconductor fabs, pretty normal chips. We use packaging that would be familiar to somebody from the semiconductor industry.
In February, PsiQuantum...
I mean, they've gotten all the way to this point, but I don't really understand what the basis of PsiQuantum's qubit is. Maybe I missed it. Is it superconducting qubits as well? But they said it was photonic, so... the fact that, I mean, we're like 11 minutes into this, and I don't know what PsiQuantum uses as its qubit is kind of funny.
Unveiled Omega, a quantum photonic chip that the company says contains all the components necessary to build utility-scale quantum computing. The chips are manufactured by New York-based Global Foundries.
Right.
Another major barrier to scaling quantum computers is the lack of a highly technical workforce needed to design, program, and run quantum systems.
Currently, the talent pool is just far too small to meet the demands of the growing industry.
One way to overcome this talent problem may be by using more computers and leaning.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of funny. I applied for a position for a management position for quantum AI in one company. And I've got a quantum background, and I spent the last few years in AI doing chatbots, and I follow this stuff. This is what I do. They didn't even want a phone interview, not even a phone screen, and there was another So I'm like, what they're saying is kind of funny and nonsensical, because it's I mean, for sure the talent pool in the US is shrinking. A lot of the technical expertise is and has been moving over to China, even in these areas.
On artificial intelligence.
But again, I mean, if you look at people like me, I was like the ideal talent pool when I finished my PhD and then when I did my first postdoc, but there was nothing for me available, even though I went around trying to find opportunities. And I mean, I'll give you an example. I went around to like banks, and what I heard back was like nonsense, of the sort of that their security breaches were the size of cannonballs, and with quantum key distribution we're trying to find like pinholes. And so right now it's kind of an absurd situation that the US finds itself in.
Already we're using large language,
but mostly self-inflicted. Like, let's just be honest, it's a self-inflicted situation that the US finds itself in.
Language models. IBM, I think, was the first company to pioneer this in order to actually supplement developer knowledge bases and allow LLMs to program quantum computers, which I think will drastically alleviate the workforce upskilling challenge in quantum computing.
But it goes both ways. AI development could also benefit from quantum computers.
There are great AI tools that can help with designing some aspects of quantum computers. And once you have a quantum computer, you can produce training data.
Look, again, just to repeat, there are a subset of mathematical problems that are provably not solvable by a classical computer within, the span of the universe, or at least a few thousand years, that our brains can solve. And so if you want human level intelligence, AI with classical computing is not going to do it. So you're going to need some quantum aspects in there
to train AIs.
Machine learning is advancing.
The quantum conundrum.
The potential of quantum computers to solve some of the world's hardest problems, like coming up with new drugs or materials for more efficient electric batteries, has many people excited. But it's challenges like this that have led some of the world's most influential technology pioneers to temper expectations about just how close we are to a useful quantum.
Sell-off accelerates as Zuckerberg comes data six here to temper sect enthusiasm. In the US, definitely. Globally, with what China's been doing and the rate and scale at which they've been working on quantum, they created cities for this. The primary one is Hefei. You can look it up, Heifei or Hefei. They created entire universities for cutting edge research. So they're doing it properly. They're creating a talent pool, a massive talent pool, and they're nurturing them. They're providing opportunities. Unlike over here, like I finished my PhD or whatever, I did a postdoc and then just dropped off. So like, what do I do next? I don't, and then suddenly, the entire environment is about, are you racist, anti-racist, and for someone like me who's a mixed race, it's all like, yeah, okay, I see racism and reverse racism. I see everything. So it just became this bizarre sort of situation where, for someone with a PhD in quantum information theory, like I couldn't just go and do a job and push forward. I'm dealing with all of this other garbage, and it's gotten worse. So despite all of this funding and stuff, which again, in my perception, is just like panic stricken, this is like all of this is out of panic and not really out of belief And the scale is not here in the US, at least from what I can tell.
Quantum computer.
If you kind of said 15 years for very useful quantum computers, that'd probably be on the early side. If you said 30 is probably on the late side, but if you picked 20, I think a whole bunch of us would believe it.
Following Wang's remarks, the market was quick
in the US
to react.
Shares of quantum computing stocks having a volatile start to the year after a steep...
And that's where all the funding has dropped in the US, is because people are now starting to believe that the Chinese are going to get there earlier than 20 years. And so they're like, oh my God, how do we get there before China? Because trust me, whichever country gets quantum computers up and running comfortably, like that country is going to dominate for the next century. Like, it's not even going to be a competition.
Run up in late 2024. Many are now down double digits in 2025 and concerns about just how soon the technology might be commercially viable.
We agree with Jensen, of course, that quantum computing is not here yet. And really the basis for his comments is that today there are small quantum processors. Google's system, for instance, that's about a 100 qubit system. The general consensus is that you need about 1 million qubits to really deliver on these world-changing applications.
Right.
At NVIDIA's annual software developer conference in March, Wang...
Yeah, you need 1 million qubits with low error rates. So the higher your error rates, the more qubits you're going to need, even more than 1 million. So the million, the number of 1 million is what was proposed by John Preskill a while ago, and he's also, credit to him, who pushed for NISQ devices, so sort of near-term, noisy, superconducting qubit devices. Let's keep pushing the research and see if there's any applications that we can find with these noisy devices. So right now it's all like, if we can get 1 million with low enough error rates, which at this rate it looks like we might be able to do that, but.
Gave quantum experts a chance to prove his timeline wrong.
This is the first event in history where a company CEO invites all of the guests to explain why he was wrong.
We think of ourselves as like 10 years where you were 10 years ago. It's going to be another 10 to 15 years to get to where NVIDIA and all the other giants are.
Well, this is March 20, so this is just like yesterday they had like a sit down. And so IronQ is trying to get Jensen to temper his low expectations. Okay.
But the complexity of quantum computing has generated controversy around some of the achievements in the field. For example, some experts and competitors are questioning Microsoft's topological qubits breakthrough that the company said would help it build a working quantum computer in a matter of years. Microsoft's research published in Nature in February, though the company said in an emailed statement that it submitted the paper almost a year prior, and during that time, Microsoft has made, quote, tremendous progress.
The exotic physics that Microsoft is pursuing is incredibly exciting, but it's a step along a journey that will ultimately yield something useful, but it's
I mean, it's very complex what they're trying to do, so it is a sort of thing where if they succeed, they can scale very fast, because if they can easily create low noise qubits which are easy to interact with and it's scalable, boom, you can just leapfrog everyone else. Here you go, 1 million, done.
Clear.
But have they done it? The details are a little slim at the moment.
When?
Microsoft said discourse and skepticism are part of the scientific process and that additional data will be shared in the coming weeks. Although quantum computing may not...
I mean, Microsoft, I grew up with Windows and, all my years of gaming in Windows and like all the research that I did was in Windows. And I didn't switch over to Mac until I started my second postdoc, and things were so overwhelming for me. It was just overwhelming in Silicon Valley. It just felt like just nothing made sense, and it still doesn't make sense. So, the Mac had gotten good enough that I was so desperate. I was just like, I just need something that works out of the box. I can't take it out. I can't fiddle. I can't spend a weekend getting it up and running. I don't want to like keep babying it every month or so, so I didn't need the super fastest for, high-end gaming and stuff. I just needed something like just up and running and get going. So yeah, if Microsoft succeeds at this, like a part of me would be happy. It's like, yeah, but again, that's just, a little sentimentality.
Be ready for prime time today. Tangible progress is being made.
I do think there are going to be results this year that hint towards real quantum utility for commercial applications. Technology that started off as a quantum computing modality is now being used to make ordinary MRI machines 100,000 times more sensitive and allow them to directly image cancer metabolism. Technologies to see 2 kilometers underground to find the critical minerals for the energy transformation, that's already happened. And then the prize of the really big machines, the million qubit machines,
right,
we know is only a handful of years away.
Public interest in quantum technology is growing. The number of quantum computing...
I mean, they really want to keep the hype up, so yes and no. I mean, it's no skin off his back if a few years from now he's like, oh, we were wrong.
Proof of concept enterprise projects.
So active quantum computing proof of concepts. So it's grown. Healthcare, finance, energy is small. Purple is logistic and operations. Yeah, so the traveling salesman problem, I think, if I remember correctly, is a known problem that has a quantum solution. Finance, yes. Healthcare, meaning what? I don't know. Like healthcare in the US, you don't need quantum computing to address healthcare concerns in the US. Anyway, materials, yes. Aerospace, high-tech, other, yeah.
Surged by 50% between 2022 and 2024 to over 150 active projects. Consulting firm Booz Allen.
So these are active projects. It doesn't mean that they have demonstrated a proof of concept. So it just indicates there's more funding being dropped into this field, which is cool. It's nice. Yay! Like, sorry to say this, but where the fuck were you guys like 15 years ago?
Airbus Ventures.
No, seriously, it's been so slow. It's ridiculous.
And Bosch Ventures have all invested in quantum computers. Meanwhile, Shadbolt says Illinois is investing $500 million to construct a quantum computing campus in Chicago, of which PsiQuantum will be the anchor tenant. PsiQuantum has also received $620 million from the Australian and Queensland governments to build a utility-scale quantum computer in Brisbane, which the company says will be operational by the end of 2027. Experts say investing now is a smart move.
When quantum computers reach quantum advantage, which is effectively the period in which quantum computers outperform classical computers at important real-world problems, it'll be much, much harder to get your hands on a quantum computer unless you're developing partnerships with the major providers right now.
Plus, Langioni adds...
So this is what I was talking about. They're all creating these partnerships so that they get first access. Not necessarily because they believe. It's mostly just they're hedging their bets. Is that fair? I don't know. You got to get your money from somewhere. I mean, I don't think the government has done a very good job of supporting quantum in general, and yeah, I don't want to talk about that anymore.
Adds quantum computers don't need to be perfect to be useful.
We had practical implications for classical computers before classical computers were error corrected. Whether computers were doing atomic simulations for the Manhattan Project, they were doing important work for the Census Bureau. We think that there's a potential for the same thing in quantum computing. And candidly, we're even looking to the next 12 to 18 months for the announcement of the first example of industrial quantum advantage that would come before error correction. And then 2029 is when we think the real inflection could come in terms of massive value creation.
Look, I'm just telling you guys, right? This all sounds exciting, and it is exciting, and I'm glad they're doing it. At least they're, better late than never on some scale. But look at solar cells. Look at battery technology. Look at electric cars. All of these started off with exciting, slow, plodding sort of attempts in the US and the West, and then it was just absorbed, taken up, and zoom, move forward by China. And at this stage in 2025, China is taking the lead. So we're not even in a realm where the US is going to do it first and then China will catch up. Like, we're in a realm where, in my perception, with this long 20 years of on the ground observing, this is my field, and in general, like across the board, like I think China is going to do it first and then just pull ahead. And even all of this is not really, like, if there is a shortage of talent, so here's sort of like, on the ground reality. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. If what they're describing is true, right? Myself and other physicists like me that I know of should have not just recruiters, should have hiring managers from various companies banging on their doors, begging them to leave their jobs and to join them, right? They should be competing for these people, but that's not happening because how they're describing talent is kind of weird. So they are, they've become so hypersensitive to any criticism and any truth and honesty, and they've overthought what they need in their workforce. And so what they've created is this really, like, tiny population of people who have access, but operating as if we don't live in a world where you can just sit in front of a computer and have 24/7 a stream of what they're doing and also see the results come out from China and all this educational platform available to us. So it's kind of bizarre because they're still operating. They're talking about next generation technology, but operating as if they still live in 1980s. So it's just really strange. It's very strange.
For end users in the right industry.
Shad Bolt is also optimistic.
When I arrived in Silicon Valley 8 years ago, a lot of people really...
Nice, 8 years ago. So there's 2025. So he came here in 2017. Right? 2017, this guy came. I came to Silicon Valley in 2007. Right? So I came like 10 years before this guy, and I've seen how the funding ecosystem works and stuff. I tried to do a biotech startup. I saw how VCs worked. There's an anathema to reality. There's an anathema to to data, real facts. And there's like a cult of positivity, which is how the whole Theranos scandal happened, which is how the whole WeWork scandal happened. So let's not pretend like we're operating in a system that's cleansed of Theranos and WeWorks. What we could be facing right now is, potentially the biggest era of scandal in U.S. economy. And, just with that frame of reference in mind, just take everything with, a bucket of salt, not just a pinch of salt, right? I mean, it's all marketing. What is the real data? How many employees do you have? You say there's a talent shortage, but when I look around, they are turning down highly talented people, right? So just keep that in mind. They're raising these funds, right? But they are turning down highly talented people. So just, be very careful. Be very careful.
Serious technical people told me that self-driving cars would never happen.
Yes, and it's still not happening. Self-driving cars are not a reality. You see, again, it's not just a reality distortion field, it is full-on delusion, right? We still don't have full self-driving cars.
in my lifetime. Too complicated, too difficult. And of course, now every other car that we see in San Francisco is a Waymo. And so quantum computing has a similar...
Every other car you see in San Francisco is a Waymo. I mean, come on. Come on. It's really not true. You see those Waymo cars, it's still in R&D. It's still research and development. You know, I mean, what he was talking about, like in 2017, no one in Silicon Valley was saying we're not going to see self-driving cars in our lifetime. This is a marketing, this is not true at all.
Sort of trajectory. What we're seeing now is a big leap to go from the small systems that we have today to the very, very large systems that are required for any kind of useful application.
No, this is completely not true. So self-driving cars are going to happen in the Bay Area. There was never, ever any conversation about whether it's going to happen or not. It was always a question of how is it going to happen, whether we should legally allow cars on the road or not. And so a couple of major discussions. One was, should it be all cameras or should it be LiDAR? And of course, it should also have LiDAR, right? You want a self-driving car regulated by government so that it has to have LiDAR in order to reduce fatalities and to make it much safer across the board. And in order to do that, there's far more flow of data. So in order to do AI control of such a rich flow of data, you need to put off full self-driving by a few years. But everyone was seeing the scale at which AI was changing. But in addition to that, it's not just the capability of whether AI can drive your car. It's if you have such sophisticated AI in your car, that's a huge energy drain. You need a massive battery. So that reduces how far your car can drive. If your car is, you know, sucking up hundreds of watts just to run the self-driving. So this is not true. It's just, he's talking as if we already have self-driving cars out there and they're perfectly safe. And it's not. We don't have full self-driving cars in the US. And I don't know. It's another puff piece, another position marketing. It's just another marketing piece to keep the hype up. Fair enough, you want to keep the hype up, but, you know, good for them. This is what their jobs rely on. But for you and me, you know, be careful with your money.